Boris Johnson has opened up an astonishing new government split with a crude outburst against Theresa May's new Brexit policy. The Foreign Secretary stunned fellow ministers with his four-letter dismissal of the Prime Minister's plan at Friday's special Chequers summit designed to unite the cabinet. His comment risks making him the first victim of Mrs. May's fresh crackdown on dissent. Mr. Johnson, who has been accused of betrayal by Tory Brexiteers for not blocking Mrs. May's soft Brexit proposals, spoke out against the plan for the UK to remain in line with Brussels rules in a new free trade zone with the EU. According to a reliable source, he complained that anyone obliged to defend the proposals would be polishing a turd. He added sarcastically, "Luckily we have some expert turd polishers," shooting a glance at one of Mrs. May's spin doctors. Challenging the Prime Minister's new policy to her face, he said that her decision to try to align UK trading rules with the EU would reduce Britain to the humiliating status of a vassal state. Share this article. He also took issue with her cherished new customs plan, the Facilitated Customs Arrangement (FCA), claiming it would be a serious inhibitor to striking new trade deals with non-EU countries. His outburst was revealed just hours after Mrs. May tried to draw a red line under weeks of open dissent from her ministers, vowing that from now on she will enforce collective cabinet responsibility and sack any ministers who defy her. Some senior Tories believe she may be forced to fire Mr. Johnson. A Mail on Sunday poll today endorses her handling of the cabinet showdown, with 33% of voters supporting her Brexit plan and 23% opposing it. The Survation poll, the first survey since the Chequers summit, suggests Mrs. May has twice the support of Mr. Johnson, although voters do not believe her plan is faithful to the EU referendum result. Last night, Eurosceptic Tories said there was so much anger at the PM sellout that some MPs would submit no confidence letters to force or challenge to her leadership. And Jacob Rees-Mogg's pro-Brexit European research group said experts believe the Chequers deal left the UK on course for a black hole Brexit, meaning we would be sucked into the orbit of EU rules with no hope of escape. Mr. Johnson made clear in the run-up to Friday's session that he was vehemently against any scheme which left us shackled to EU rules, leading to fears in Downing Street that he and other pro-Brexit ministers could resign. But Mrs. May launched her own plan to kill off his revolt, signaling in advance she had already lined up talented junior ministers to replace any cabinet quitters, forcing all those at the summit to hand over their phones to stop them briefing against her under the table, and issuing an official No. 10 communiqué declaring victory, while her critics were still stuck inside arguing. This newspaper understands that 7 out of the 30 ministers at the summit spoke out against the plan. Mr. Johnson left Chequers after dinner late on Friday evening in the back of a government car, having chosen not to resign. But his position prompted hardline Brexiteer Andrew Bridgen to liken Mr. Johnson's approach to Neville Chamberlain's appeasement of Hitler. Writing in today's Mail on Sunday, the outspoken Conservative MP says, "We needed Boris to emulate his hero Churchill. Instead, he gave us a modern-day version of Neville Chamberlain. But an ally of Mr. Johnson hit back, Boris has acted with total propriety. He told the Prime Minister his views openly. There is nothing new in him expressing himself in robust and colorful language. There is no offense in that. When asked why Mr. Johnson had not resigned, a supporter of the Foreign Secretary said Boris is of more use to the country inside the cabinet because it will enable him to stop a soft Brexit getting any softer. The only person who would benefit from him leaving cabinet would be Michel Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator. By staying, Boris can carry on making the argument for the Brexiteers. But he supports collective cabinet responsibility and will abide by it. He will not be speaking out publicly against the proposals. Number 10 sources claim that Mr. Johnson was engaged and constructive throughout the day. They claimed his comment about polishing a turd was light-hearted and denied he said Mrs. May risked making the UK a vassal state of the EU. But he is not alone in his denunciation of Mrs. May's FCA plan. One of Brexit Secretary David Davis's aides said it is called the FCA because it is a F up. The drama could revive the tension between Mr. Johnson and fellow Brexit campaigner Michael Gove, who infamously betrayed Mr. Johnson in the 2016 Tory leadership contest. In contrast with Mr. Johnson, the Environment Secretary helped swing the cabinet behind Mrs. May's plan, leaving Boris outgunned. A source close to Mr. Gove described his interventions on Friday as pragmatic, saying, "It's going too far to say Michael was cheerleading for May's plan." His view was that given that the party does not have a Commons majority and that the EU is playing hardball, her proposal is probably the best on offer. After dinner on Friday, the Prime Minister gave a short speech in which she hailed a historic day and paid a warm tribute to Mr. Davis for leading the negotiations. Mr. Davis briefed Mr. Barnier on the Chequers proposal yesterday. Although Mr. Barnier has cautiously welcomed the proposals in public, senior EU figures have privately repeated warnings that the UK cannot cherry-pick and stay in the single market for goods without allowing sweeping freedoms for EU citizens to enter the UK. Last night, Mrs. May said that her plan was a good deal for Britain and a good deal for our future. She added that her plan would spell an end to free movement of people, the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK, and vast sums of money going to Brussels and Britain taking control of our money, laws and our borders. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn challenged her to hold a general election if she failed to get agreement on the new Brexit plan and said the Chequers agreement might unravel in a few days. Politician with a penchant for fruity language, Theresa May is just the latest person to have felt the full force of classic scholar Boris's right rhetoric, often laced with four-letter words. 2 weeks ago it emerged he dismissed business fears about Brexit, saying "F business." At the same time he said the UK was heading for a bog-roll Brexit. In February he was seen muttering BS at Jeremy Corbyn in the Commons. In 2017 he lashed out at lefty tossers on a visit to Bristol. In 2016 he caused outrage in Turkey by penning a limerick with the rhyme Ankara and W-er. In 2015 he told a taxi driver to F off, and Boris Johnson thinks he's Churchill, but the so-called Brexit deal proves he's really Chamberlain, writes Andrew Bridge, and this so-called Brexit deal is nothing short of a betrayal of the 4 million people who voted to leave the EU. What on earth were the staunch leavers in the cabinet doing? Where was Boris Johnson? At Chequers on Friday, we needed him to emulate his hero, Winston Churchill. Instead, he gave us a modern-day version of Neville Chamberlain. Sadly, the Foreign Secretary was not alone in apparently waving the white flag of appeasement in the direction of Brussels. Other Brexiteer buccaneers and recent Brexit converts also jumped ship. The door to Mrs. May's country residence was open, but they chose not to walk out of it. Perhaps the threat of the withdrawal of the government limo was just too great. This is a huge mistake on two grounds. Firstly, all those harboring leadership hopes have done their ambitions fatal harm. Grassroots party members will have no truck with their perceived treachery. Some will try to keep their leadership hopes alive by claiming it was not the time to quit and they had a duty to stay on to ensure Brexit is not further watered down. But it leaves only one credible contender with the integrity and backbone to follow Mrs. May, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Secondly, Brexiteer cabinet ministers are losing their nerve at the wrong time. This is not the end of the battle, it is the start of the real fight for a true Brexit. What Theresa May unveiled last week appears little short of a punishment Brexit designed by the EU to dissuade any other country from leaving the bloc. With no incentive to offer non-EU countries free trade deals when we leave, through mutual recognition of standards, the UK will forever remain a captive market for overpriced EU goods. It means going through the pretense of leaving, but becoming a non-voting associate member, a vassal state. We would still be locked into the EU's suffocating embrace via this common rule book, while the dead hand of the European Court of Justice will be lurking in the background. In contrast, we should call Brussels' bluff and, if necessary, leave without a formal deal. A so-called no-deal scenario may sound scary, but no deal does not actually mean no deal. It simply means the UK would trade on WTO terms, which we use already to trade with most of the world. The fight to deliver a proper Brexit starts here and now.